So just to introduce myself, my name is Chris, and I am the founder and the president of blockchain at Phillips Academy. We are one of the first high school blockchain clubs to be onboarded to BAF, which is a nonprofit organization focused on accelerating the development and adoption of Web3. We focus on educating our members about blockchain development. We source sponsors and speakers for our university-affiliated blockchain clubs, and we support academic blockchain researchers and host educational talk shows like this. So for any new listeners, please consider joining our rich community to help propel yourself in your Web3 journey. This is also the start of a super interesting and important speakers series where we will cover the topic of social impact and implications of Web3 technologies in the real world. Named the Beacon of Hope, we really aim to raise awareness for the good of this technology and to inspire students who are passionate in using technology for the betterment of society. Here with us today, we're beyond excited to have Victor Mapunga. He is a serial entrepreneur from Zimbabwe and the co-founder of FlexID, which is a platform built on Algorand that leverages blockchain technology to create digital identity credentials. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I guess for a little bit of background, can you start by giving us a primer on decentralized identifiers before we get into FlexID? So how does this technology work and why is it important?
Yeah, so to understand decentralized identifiers, you have to understand the intention that organizations like W3C had when actually building the initial protocols of the internet, and what today a lot of people are now referring to as Web3. So if we want to build a decentralized, internet protocol that allows individuals to be in control of their data, one of the key ways is to have technology that allows us link particular credentials or to link particular data to those particular individuals or those particular users in a manner that's interoperable across the entire web. So decentralized identifiers, this is a standard by W3C and various other organizations like DIF that essentially is allowing technology to be built in a manner that allows interoperability across different platforms without siloing data in the traditional manner that you kind of see today. So a very typical example is if you want to be able to carry out a particular verification process or onboarding process for an individual that perhaps is using a different platform. With today's standards, it's very difficult to do that. This is why you have sort of these big tech companies with all these siloed databases. However, with DIDs, we are able to abstract away individuals and users from those silos to essentially enable them, to have access to a different set of programs that otherwise they wouldn't have access to easily. So there's various other technologies that then incorporate with DIDs, such as verifiable credentials, again, which is a standard that allows us to then be able to link those VCs to a particular DID, thereby essentially creating this digital ID, whereby the DID is our reference point as to which credentials a particular wallet or a particular user, a particular program is actually holding. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess to segue into FlexID, what is the problem that FlexID is trying to solve, and what is your story behind this project?
Yeah, so to take you back, so I spent some time in the US and the UK. And I was just doing various programs in computer science and entrepreneurship. And when I came back to Zimbabwe, my major, plan was I want to start a business. I want to do something back home, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do at that particular point in time. So, I just decided to register a bank account with one of our very local popular banks in order just to get my stuff settled in the country since I was back. And when I did that, I was under the assumption that, wow, this process is probably going to take me, a few, maybe 30 minutes to an hour. if things are really slow, maybe this is going to take me about 2 hours, right? So that was my predisposition at the time. So I went into the bank, got the collection, got the application form, started filling them in, and by the second page, I was stuck. And the reason I was stuck is because there is a requirement by a lot of financial institutions to provide particular credentials for them to be able to do their KYC, which is know your customer, right? So if you ever register for any financial product, typically you have to go through this KYC process. Now, in developed economies, there are standards that are in place that allow companies to do KYC quite easily. So, for example, if you're in the US, you find that if you have a social security number, it's very easy to get data about you, which would allow companies to easily onboard you. But we don't have those kind of standards, in Africa and many other places in the world. So when I was asked to, show my proof of residence, which is essentially a document that shows I live at a particular place, it really didn't matter that I was born here or I was a citizen here. I had to go to the police so that I can get a clearance from them. Then I had to go to a commissioner of oaths, for him to give that stamp to actually say, I actually live here. And that entire process extends the application window from just 30 minutes to an hour to a few days. And this is if you're in an urban setting. If you're coming from a rural area, this process is going to last you, more than 2 days, in other cases into a week. And I decided to investigate this issue to actually find out what the problem was. Is there no way for us to easily verify individuals and onboard them into the services? And after spending, about 6 weeks investigating this challenge, going from bank to bank, it dawned on me that there was a lack of identity infrastructure, which would allow individuals to easily get verified when they're applying for a different service. So if you come to Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, you find that mobile money is very prevalent, where you have individuals using, their mobile phones and their SIM cards, but, to do transactions and to store money. But this doesn't actually matter when this individual wants to borrow from a bank or when this individual wants to open a traditional bank account. They can't actually share that information because it exists in these silos. And FlexID was organically born from that problem and that realization. And initially, when we started out, we really didn't think of building it on the blockchain. I wanted a solution which would work best for this particular problem. And during our trial and error, we actually discovered that, well, one of the key reasons this problem has not been solved as of yet is the traditional infrastructure that was there. It was highly centralized. And because it was highly centralized, it made it extremely difficult for the data to be trustworthy. It made it very difficult to comply to privacy issues. And it made it very difficult to have interoperability. And this is where decentralized ledger technology really then came into the picture. And we realized that, wow, now we're at a time where we can build on top of a particular blockchain, and it actually solves majority of these problems. So we actually ended up building this on top of the Algorand blockchain because it actually solved majority of the problems that we're discovering around this issue of data symmetry.
Awesome. Awesome. So with FlexID's new and more efficient process in creating identity, can you outline for us how this renewed process might work? So from an organization or government joining the ecosystem to the user installing and using FlexID in real life?
Yeah, wonderful. So FlexID's ecosystem is made up of 3 main participants. So the first participant are organizations which we call issuers. So this is an institution, an entity, a startup that is actually responsible for issuance of digital credentials. Now, it can be a university that is actually issuing out diplomas or degrees or micro degrees through FlexID. It can be a bank that is actually issuing out bank statements, credit scores, or electronic KYC certificates to their account holders. It can be a doctor that is actually issuing out prescription or a health record to one of her patients. So that is with the issuers. And then the second most important participant is the user, the holder. So when the issuer actually issues you this credential, it is stored in your FlexID wallet. And this FlexID wallet is a self-sovereign ID wallet, which essentially means that the data that's in there is only kept in that particular wallet, and it's cryptographically secured. So the way you would have, traditionally, maybe your crypto wallet with your cryptocurrency in it, FlexID essentially allows you to store these cryptographically signed, verifiable credentials from issuers. So now the issuer has given you, now the doctor has given you your prescription, you have it in your FlexID wallet, then what? This is where the third participant comes in, which are the verifiers. And verifiers play an important role in FlexID because they actually create the demand for a lot of these credentials. And who is the verifier, say in this healthcare case? It's going to be your pharmacy. So if you want to buy prescription medicine online, and you want to be able to verify that that prescription actually belongs to you, today is a very difficult process. If you want to apply for a financial product or a financial service on a fintech platform or an investment platform or even a crypto exchange, and you come from countries like Zimbabwe or other countries in emerging markets, it's very hard for a lot of those companies and institutions to verify whether the information you've provided is real or not. And verifiers essentially use FlexID to then verify those digital credentials and actually see the cryptographic signature of the issuer that signed it, along with other metadata, which actually gives them that assurance that that credential is authentic. And with FlexID, you as the user, you play the role of the holder, and it's a permission-based system, meaning that you give permission to which verifiers can have access to your data. And essentially, this ecosystem then thrives on the issuances and verifications that consistently happen on this network.
Right. So it seems very clear to me how this ecosystem can thrive after, once someone gets their ID or gets their Flex ID integrated. But I guess the question is, what are some of the issues with the identification systems in Africa, right? What about the people who I guess have issues getting that ID in the first place or getting issued the ID in the first place? So maybe people with unregistered births or, hasn't applied, missed opportunities, or if they're displaced peoples, right? Can this technology benefit them?
Yes, certainly. Now, in Africa, we have 400 million plus people with that exact problem. So, maybe they didn't get a birth certificate when they were born because the facilities were not present in that area. In some cases, you have individuals without any national IDs, and they're very difficult to onboard. And in some cases, you have refugees, right? You have individuals that are coming from war-torn countries, or they're seeking, some form of political asylum, and they move into these different societies, and they have no particular identification credentials that can allow them to easily participate in that economy. Now, FlexID comes and solves this problem in a very unique manner. The first way we solve this problem is, number one, when we actually create that DID for you, that decentralized identifier, right? It really doesn't matter whether it was the government or it's the bank or it's the microfinance that actually issued you your first credential. And in our network, we have created an ecosystem of different agents that are incentivized to actually carry out sort of these social identification programs. So you have individuals that can go to all these different refugee camps, or individuals that go to these rural areas with nothing but a smartphone. And they're actually able to create the first DID for that individual, and that serves as the basis for other credentials that are ever going to be created. And essentially what it means is this individual now at the most basic layer is able to start accessing the most basic services, whether it's registering a SIM card, whether it's registering with the microfinance, or whether it's actually being able to receive, some form of financial assistance from, different organizations. Now with their FlexID wallet, they're able to essentially do that. And what happens to people without smartphones, right? Because if you look in Africa, you look in Southeast Asia, you look in South America, you do still have large populations of people that don't have these smartphones. And initially, our first iteration of FlexID wasn't actually an app. it was a WhatsApp chatbot that could operate even on semi-smartphones and low-end smartphones that are very affordable. So just using that WhatsApp chatbot, an individual is able to interact initially with the custodial version of FlexID, where they're able to start stacking up credentials, and they can always transfer them to a fully self-sovereign ID app when they have that Android device or when they have that iOS device. And in some cases, we do have individuals that don't even have a phone. And with FlexID, again, we're actually able to create physical versions of your wallet in the form of QR codes that can actually be printed out, or in the form of actual smart cards that can be distributed to individuals. So, operating from Africa, initially we actually had to be realistic about the kind of market that we were intending on serving. So if you have large amounts of people that do not have access to some of these high-end devices, you want to be able to give them the service at the most primal level that then allows them to sort of climb that socioeconomic ladder.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. It's also interesting to see that FlexID is beyond just that technical layer, but also that physical in-person social layer too. And it's very interesting to see all these developments in DIDs and this new form of or new sector of technology in Africa. And I've read that there are already many developments in place in countries like Sierra Leone. And I was just wondering, were those implementations of digital identities successful? And like, where are we at with the physical implementations of that kind of technology today?
Yeah, so I mean, different countries are currently experimenting with different options on how to sort of tackle this identity issue. And in particular with Sierra Leone, a very small country, they've been doing multiple trials to essentially sort of create this digital ID infrastructure for the country. It's still very much in its early stages. You still do not have sort of one particular country that has created a model or in Africa that other countries are yet to adopt. And the primary reason is if governments are operating in this siloed manner, it's going to create complications for collaboration or for even innovation that can be adopted in different areas. So one of the key ways that we operate is we're actually engaged a lot of organizations sort of from a collaborative perspective to be able to essentially create something that has unified standards. So if you look at FlexID, we've built it on top of W3C standards, diff standards, and the reason is if someone decides to build a solution for decentralized ID and they're in in Kenya or they're in Uganda or they're in Tanzania, regardless of whether an user uses FlexID or not, they should be able to access that service using their credentials. So, different countries are currently experimenting with different options, but definitely the road is still very long until we actually get to a place where we can say, well, now we have a model which different countries can now adopt quite confidently. But it's very exciting that you do have some forward-thinking governments that are currently experimenting with this. If we have more of those, then we will solve the problem much faster.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and it seems like the interoperability is one of the key pillars to, building this technology for the future. And you mentioned earlier that you were going on that expedition for, onboarding peoples and local communities. And I want to hear more about that. What are the successes of FlexIDs so far in the real world?
Yeah. So one of our most interesting initiatives has actually been in healthcare, in collaboration, with a healthcare company based here that's responsible for building all these decentralized clinics, especially in marginal communities and in rural communities. And the challenge there is if you go to a clinic, and you want to get, checked, or they carry out the diagnosis on you, they're going to write everything about that diagnosis in a book, right, in a counter book. And if you have to go to the city to actually see a specialist or a surgeon, or you want to go to a pharmacy in an urban environment, then they have to actually rely on your credential. And you can't even do that remotely. And in most cases, the cost of re-diagnosis is actually very high for a lot of these individuals, a majority which are earning less than $10 a day. And we partnered up with this healthcare organization to give FlexID in order for those clinics, for those nurses in those communities to be able to start generating digital healthcare credentials such as electronic prescriptions and electronic health records that are sent directly to a user's phone number. Again, using these sort of low internet solutions. So all you really need is a phone number, and the nurse is actually able to send you your credentials directly to your phone. Or if you really don't have that, they're able to print out a QR code that can be scanned when you go through one of these particular environments. And we've onboarded over 50,000 patients to date using that. And just last week, we're able to onboard an additional 29,000. So it's pretty. It's been actually pretty fun. I would say to engage in that. And in Zimbabwe, we're currently sort of operating, with this mindset of a sandbox. And the reason is, Africa is pretty big, right? You have over a billion people on the continent, and like I said earlier, at least half of them have this challenge of identity. So if you want a solution that really scales, right, a solution that can go to Brazil, a solution that can go to Sri Lanka, to India, you really have to initially test a lot of your hypotheses at a very small level in a market that you're really familiar with. And that's the strategy we initially went with. And we've received quite a lot of success in that limited environment. And now we've been rapidly scaling up our solution. So we have operations now in places like Sri Lanka, where we are onboarding users for financial services. We have work in Tanzania, where we are onboarding users again for mobile money related products. So now we're at a stage where we're taking some of our learnings from here and actually now applying them in different markets. But those expeditions have been quite eye-opening because a lot of initial assumptions are very wrong, which is very, very common if you're building a startup. But what's always important and imperative is to be able to then build solutions based off what the market actually requires. And in this particular case, realizing that majority of our users really rely on this infrastructure for their day-to-day lives to proceed. So those expeditions have been quite, they've been quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, going back to something you said earlier, you mentioned that another big issue is that a lot of these vendors and businesses and people who've been saving up all their lives, and have transacted business, lack credit history, right? A more, I guess, traditional and more, verified history of credit. So, how can FlexID, I guess, and these emerging technologies be used to track this important metric that is a key component to financial inclusion?
Yeah, no, I actually love this question. And the reason I love it is because my country is a very informal, economy. And by that, we mean majority of the working class actually operate within the informal sector. So they're not formally employed, right? They don't work for Google. They don't work for a Walmart or, a company like that. These are, entrepreneurs, individuals that are basically hustling. Most of them are vendors. Some of them are subsistence farmers. And there are two types of transactions these people do. The first type of transactions that's very popular are these cash-based transactions. And the second most popular form of transactions is mobile money, which has really taken Africa by storm. And with FlexID, what we're able to do for the very first time is we allow these mobile money platforms to generate, this transactional history, verifiable credentials that an individual is actually able to store on their device. So similar to how you're going to request your bank to give you your bank statement, FlexID essentially allows you to be able to generate those transactional, history credentials. And what happens when a person just trades cash, right? Like what happens when all you do is trade cash and you have no electronic history of these particular transactions? Again, FlexID has a solution that we're actually implementing to allow people to do this. And the key thing we do is if you are one of those vendors who consistently receives cash, our platform starts to create incentives for you and for your customers as well to log all those transactions. And over time, you start to build steadily this, reliable transactional history that a third party is able to access. Now, the reason this is very important is imagine there's Chris in the United States, and Chris has $1 million. And he says, I want to help small businesses in Africa. I want to help some entrepreneurs in Africa. But how do I know that these people actually do what they claim to do? Right. So, Chris doesn't need to fly all the way to Zimbabwe to actually carry out his due diligence. With FlexID, he's able to request for those credentials using one API, and he's able to verify instantly whether or not those credentials fit the criteria that is actually set. And what this means is we can start to decentralize finance in a manner that actually removes power from traditional institutions and removes barriers to entry for markets that most people wouldn't be familiar with. So you actually have cases where a lot of companies cannot expand in markets like Africa or Southeast Asia simply because they cannot carry out that initial basic action and task of performing KYC or performing due diligence. Because again, these are unfamiliar territories. You don't know anything about Zimbabwe. I can tell you that I went to the University of Wakanda. And you might believe that or you might not believe that. So how best do we ensure that you are able to also start operating in this market? So FlexID essentially then allows you to perform that verification. And with that, the credit scoring aspect is removed from a traditional credit bureau, and it's now sort of on an individual basis. And now these users and individuals can now have access to different services that otherwise they wouldn't have access to. But what's most interesting for us is what innovators can actually do now that the technology and the market is available to them. We are looking at a future where some entrepreneur, some student is going to build sort of a lending app, and they're going to use FlexID, sort of as their layer 2 protocol to perform the onboarding and the verification without ever really needing to have any offices in Africa or even any physical kind of presence. And this is really going to allow mass scale for solutions, and also allow for specialization, right? You might have some individuals that say, I want to lend to women that are operating in this sector. So again, FlexID allows you to carry out even sort of that specialized approach to onboarding users and to performing some of these tasks.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, it seems as though that there is massive social implications to your technology, and and this is really just the start to accelerating, a broader development of technology in Africa. And I guess what I was wondering is, it seems like a big part of, I guess, accelerating this development is government involvement and assistance. So yeah, how are governments receiving this technology?
Yeah, so I always get that question when I go to conferences. A lot of people always ask, so what are the government's opinion on it? What I'll say is, it's been much better over the past few years, especially after COVID. Because a lot of government parastatals and institutions realize the need to have this digital infrastructure because majority of our economies just came to a standstill, right? Like I mentioned to you, here in Zimbabwe, and I want you guys to get this number right. We have a 90%, so that's 90% unemployment rate. All right. So, I think if you guys have like a 10% unemployment rate in the US, that's like, that's going to be breaking news or something. Here it's 90%. So, imagine an economy where majority of people are already not formally employed and it shuts down. They're unable to do anything at all. The government couldn't actually even give out any form of grants to people because for the most part, they didn't even have the tools to do that. So after that period, the conversations became much more productive. In my part of Africa, but we also have been engaging other governments outside of Africa, such as in Southeast Asia. Like I mentioned, we're working on a pilot in Sri Lanka that is actually operating this month. And it's gonna, in the target there is to onboard close to 5 million users that are going to be using this. So we're constantly engaging our public sector to see the value in this technology, really. But the onus is on us as entrepreneurs and as private sector to actually show the results in real time. Government, is characterized by a lot of things. Bureaucracy is one of them. So as you can expect, speed to adoption is really slow. However, when private sector and when companies and startups actually prove the social impact and the material impact, even the economic impact, it's a much easier conversation to have. So we're constantly opening up our channels to dialogue. And that's something that we work on consistently.
Yeah. And it seems like from a lot of articles I'm reading, that, I guess governments seem to be more, I guess, compliant or looking forward to the developments in these technologies. But just a question or more of, I guess, since the vision is to push this out to, the hundreds of millions in Africa, are there any assurances in case someone loses their digital identity? I guess, like, how are these keys kept safe, and I guess what is preventing citizens from fraud and impersonation if they misplace their keys or have bad practices in key management?
Yeah. Now, that's a very important question, primarily because initially there's this aspect of education that a lot of companies, especially in our industry, never really talk about, right? If you want to give a very sophisticated solution, especially in the realm of blockchain and cryptocurrency, but the market you're targeting that you consistently say is unbanked, it doesn't actually understand some of this concept, such as private keys, storage, and how to manage them. You actually initially have to go through with them this transition period where you actually educate them on what all this actually means and how best to have best practices. So that's usually what we engage with first. And this is why we actually do a lot of those expeditions, because we actually want the users to be fully aware of what this essentially means. FlexID allows you to back up a lot of your private keys if you're using the SSID app. So you can back them up in numerous ways. You can download them on your device. You can save them if you really want in cloud. We don't recommend people to do that, but if you want to do that, you can. Or various other methods, right? You can even store your credentials offline if you want to be able to do that. And then in some cases, we do have users that are going to use the custodial solution, so they don't really have to worry about sort of that private key management. And what happens when someone wants to be nefarious in our ecosystem? Now, this is very important because you've heard this statement, garbage in, garbage out. Now, FlexID, the initial point of entry for any wallet usually is the credentials that you get from your issuers. So imagine I buy 10 smartphones and I download FlexID 10 times and I have the app on 10 phones and I want to do something nefarious. Unfortunately, I can actually not get 10 issuers or the same issuer to give me that credential 10 times over, right? It's impossible. So there's only one Victor who's going to get his university degree from the University of Wakanda. I actually can't self-issue myself a credential, which prevents, sort of that initial, push that a lot of individuals might want to game the system. So at best, you're just going to have people with a lot of empty wallets with no credentials in them, right? So those aren't actually going to be of any particular threat to you. By design, the key thing is the issuers play a very important part. This is why we're actively working to bring issuers into our ecosystem, because they give us that first layer of trust that a lot of verifiers actually rely on. And in an extreme scenario, right, what happens if, say, something happens with an issuer? Perhaps they're corrupted, perhaps they're nefarious players at this university that want to give out this fake university degrees. So we've actually designed an incentive system that actually allows verifiers, users, and ourselves to actually rank a lot of these issuers based on trustworthiness. So if a particular issuer gives out credentials and those credentials are not of high quality, what it essentially means is in future, it's going to be extremely difficult for anyone to verify credentials from that particular issuer. So we've sort of put a little bit of game theory in it to incentivize a lot of these issuers to have the best possible behavior. And we're consistently carrying out sort of these educational programs for the users to be able to also manage, their private keys. So it's always a work in progress, but we are hoping that as we scale, we're able to solve that along the way.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I guess a question for students in the audience who are currently building and building social good projects or organizations, and I think you're a prime example of how to do it, grassroots development and building for the people. So I guess, can you describe like the process of building alongside stakeholders, how to do it well, and yeah, just like how do you build a product that is designed for the people?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to talk to the people, right? You need to talk to the people that have this particular problem. That is a no-brainer. You cannot remotely build a product for impact without that consultation with those individuals. At times it's even best to live amongst them and to also experience the problem firsthand. And that allows you to have this first principle approach when building out the solution, instead of a solution-oriented approach whereby the technology becomes the primary goal instead of the actual process itself. So we decided to build it from first principles, and the technology came later. Like I described, when we started out, we didn't think blockchain. The blockchain sort of became a natural solution after we actually did those initial engagement. The second thing that I would actually recommend with this process is, you want to do a lot of trial and error to actually see at times what actually works. So this is one of the key things about being a startup or even being a young student, right? If you're just hacking around, it's all right to fail, right? It's all right to build something that is not going to get the kind of traction or the kind of response you required. But what's important is to get that feedback from the market, from individuals as to what actually they expect, and to then iterate and build from that. The third thing I would say is have a collaborative mindset and a collaborative framework for your startup or for your product or solution. By this, I mean, be very open to work with organizations that might have different approaches to solving a problem that you might have traditionally, and learn from some of those nuances that they might have. So, a very good example is when we were building out our healthcare solution, we decided to actually work, with startups and even with doctors within the healthcare world. And they were able to actually give us a lot of points, which helped us save time and not build out unnecessary features, and just build a refined product that solved that specific problem that they had. So definitely operating, I mean, we consistently talk about, decentralize this, decentralize that, right? We always talk about collaboration this, collaboration that, but we need to actually action it, right? And we need to be able to do that, and it needs to reflect even in our business models, that whatever partners come in your ecosystem, they're able to benefit, and they're also able to have these positive incentives which keep them within your ecosystem, right? Instead of keeping them sort of in a vendor locked-in model. They want to work with you. They want to help you succeed. They want to give you, the solutions and the ideas which are going to help, your company go forward. And then I'll say the last thing is, impact doesn't mean, there is no economic incentive at all. FlexID is a for-profit company. We have a business model, we have a revenue model, which aims to generate a lot of revenue long term. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. If you want impact at a very global level, you cannot do that if your model is not economically sustainable. And this has been a big problem of a lot of social impact-oriented programs that have come into Africa and a lot of emerging worlds. They're just not sustainable, right? So if you create a program and say, I want to give books to children in Africa. What happens the next year that those children want more books? What happens when you have more and more kids that want more books, and all you are getting are donations, or you don't have a model that's going to allow you to be sustainable? So you want to build an impact-oriented for-profit business that allows you to have stakeholder engagements with investors and with consumers that are going to benefit from your solution. So definitely never separate those two, because if something is not economically sustainable, it means whoever you were trying to help, after some period of time, they're going to be left holding the bag, right? Imagine, if you build a product for people and then your organization goes bust, and they were now reliant on that. You don't want to keep users stuck with something that no longer has the support that they traditionally had. So definitely always have an economically positive model, which is going to allow you to be sustainable long term.
Right. Yeah. It is always confusing to me why the idea of social impact has always been synonymous with nonprofit, right? It's never really made sense. And it's great to see that with the rise of blockchain technology and these new, I guess, groups of social impact projects that were proving that wrong and changing the mindsets of, I guess, this new generation of change makers. But yeah, I really love what you said about I guess rethinking the way founders are problem solving, instead of, I guess, trying to fit everything in the mold of decentralization and blockchain, actually care and focus on the problem that you're trying to solve, right? Instead of creating the problem. Like that just reminds me, I don't know if you've seen the meme of, it was on Twitter for a bit, but that guy with the 3 bicycle wheels, and it's like, every Web3 founder, And I really think that, in order for us to move beyond that, I guess move past that, and I guess try to start bringing Web3 into the real world, we need to start using it or thinking about the problem first, right? And yeah, well, I think that we've gone over a lot of very valuable topics, and I want to open up the floor to any participants or people who have any questions to ask. But yeah, it was a really, really awesome conversation. And I think there's a lot to be learned in your style of development, innovating, and building that I guess can be very inspiring.
Much, Victor, for speaking. I have a question. I saw FlexID is building on Algorand. Is that right?
Yes.
Nice. And can you tell us a little bit why you chose Algorand compared to other blockchain eventually?
Yeah. So FlexID has essentially built a layer 2 network on top of Algorand, which we call the Flex network. And that Flex network is what actually powers this protocol of issuances and verifications that happen. Now, why did we actually choose Algorand? If you look at identity has sort of this trilemma problem where there is an issue of privacy, right? There is an issue of scale, right? Whereby you want to be able to serve a very large market. And then there's an issue of decentralization. You don't want to give one organization a lot of power. We actually discovered Algorand as, at the time, the only blockchain that solved the blockchain trilemma, where, you have this issue of decentralization in place, unlike other chains where it's quite questionable. I don't want to name drop Solana, but you have a lot of very questionable blockchains out there. Then there's an issue of scale, right? And when we look at scale, we're saying, okay, if something is going to grow really large, is the performance and efficiency going to be maintained? And again, with Algorand, you find that the block finality is within a few seconds, and we've never actually had any problems with its throughput. We've never had any problems even when we were onboarding users en masse. So there's a particular day where we actually issued out about 50,000 credentials from one particular organization, right? And that just happened. It just happened swiftly, right? It was like, it was like probably driving a Rolls Royce. It was just amazing. And the last thing, of great importance there isn't this issue of, decentralization and privacy. So if you look at if you look at privacy, privacy is a very important issue for ID. You want to ensure that the user and the users and the institutions that are on this platform have complete control of their data, and it has the continuation and continuity that is not reliant even on FlexID as a company. So one of the most interesting things I always tell people is if FlexID, the company, goes bankrupt today, you can still have access to your credentials, you can transfer them, you can still get them verified, because this is all happening on the Algorand blockchain. And we are sort of now the interface that allows you to then do these interactions with different organizations. And on an organizational level, Algorand itself is a very amazing organization, very supportive ecosystem. We've worked with them since day one, since the mainnet launch. Their tech support is really helpful. A lot of smart engineers that you can ask questions any day and they help you. The business development team is also very amazing. They've been instrumental in also allowing us to see the potential of FlexID and how it can grow. So beyond sort of the technical, sort of the technical aspect, there's also, an organizational aspect where it's really led by people that know what they're doing. Sylvia, Professor Mikali is a very, well-known and well-respected, individual, and you have a lot of individuals working with him that are very, insightful and forward-thinking. So for us, it was really a combination of, working with those organizations. And one of the things really, the world of crypto really loves to talk about banking the unbanked, but very few companies, actually then, walk the talk. They rarely have presence in some of these emerging markets. They rarely actually put up investment, for companies and for organizations in these regions. And Algorand has been really different in that they've been willing to actually commit resources that actually propel solutions in places like Africa, places like South America, to actually scale. So if you're thinking about building, a Web3 company, it sometimes it's way more than just the technical aspect. Or the engineering. At times, it's really about the kind of ecosystem, or rather the kind of family you want to get involved with. So I see Algorand as more of a family than anything else, because they've just been very instrumental, and this is necessary for building, long-term companies.
Thank you so much for the answer. Yeah, it's pretty powerful. Yeah, if just to think that if a company fail for one reason or another, people can still access the data, can still, work with it. So yeah, blockchain is really powerful for that. I love it. I think Madi has a question.
Yeah, I see. Is FlexID hiring? What are the positions? Yeah, so FlexID is actually hiring. We recently closed, one of our safe, and we've been actively recruiting developers and people that are going to work in biz dev. There are some internship opportunities that are available. And what I'll do is I will communicate that through Chris. who'll be able to distribute that to his network and such that you guys are able to see it. And some of these are remote based, so you don't even have to come to Africa. It would be great if you can, if you have a summer break, but that's going to be like next year or on spring break or something. But you can work on some of these roles very remotely. So in biz dev, in marketing, in sales, we're actively recruiting individuals, and it's a lot of young people. It's a company really made up of a lot of young people, and we're also ensuring that there's a balance as well. So I'll definitely communicate that to you guys, and we'll be hosting a hackathon towards the end of the fourth quarter. Again, we're going to post details on that. And essentially the purpose of this hackathon is you'll be able to build different applications on top of FlexID in different industry verticals. So you can, you should really go crazy. If you're a developer and you want to really trial and see if the tech lives up to its name. So we're also looking forward to that, and I'll consistently communicate that to you guys.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I know there's definitely a lot of eager students and talented students in BAF that would be more than happy to play around with FlexID's technology and to really get their hands dirty in terms of developing and building alongside such talented and great entrepreneurs. But I guess our time here is concluding. Thank you so much for joining us. That was awesome. And it was a great start to this amazing speaker series. Maybe we'll be looking forward to having you on soon to hear more developments on FlexID. Well, thank you so much, Victor.